Hello, and welcome to the first of our Civic Caucus interview series, Lessons Learned, Advice for the Future. You're sitting down with Minnesota former governors, and we can't imagine a better leader to open our series than former Governor Arne Carlson. Governor Carlson's public life spanned most of the second half of Minnesota's 20th century and included serving on the Minneapolis City Council, the Minnesota Legislature, 12 years as state auditor, and then eventually 2 terms as our governor. Governor Carlson's 2 terms as governor are remembered well for his fierce independence, stellar fiscal management, investments in education, and signing of Minnesota Care into law. Governor Carlson remains a greatly respected voice in Minnesota's public life. Governor Carlson, welcome to the program. So great to have you.
Delighted.
And we have a good interview panel tonight as well. First of all, I want to introduce Jay Kiedrowski. Jay served as a policy fellow at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, following a distinguished career in public finance and as a Wells Fargo executive. Jay, thank you so much for being with us.
Glad to be here.
Dave Broden once served as former Congressman Bill Frenzel's kitchen cabinet, or in the kitchen cabinet, is a longtime policy expert on business development. He serves as president of Broden Resources Solutions, a firm specializing in high-tech business development. Has a longtime contributor to the Civic Caucus. Dave, welcome to the program.
Great. Thank you for inviting me.
Good to have you. Arya Alagappan joins us as our future leader tonight. Arya is an upcoming senior at Eden Prairie High School. He is on the speech team, is an accomplished saxophonist, and I know is extremely excited about meeting you, Governor, and being a part of our panel. Arya, welcome to our panel.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Great to have you with us. Governor, I want to start you with the first question, and it's a big one. What is the lesson that you learned as governor that you believe is most relevant to the challenges that will be faced by our next governor?
I pray that the 8 years go quickly. Is there any response out there, or am I talking to myself?
No, we can hear you.
Oh, you can? Okay.
We can hear you well.
Yeah. Let me just say this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time giving advice. My administration ended some 26 years ago. But what I would like to do is very quickly go through what it is that built us and where are we today. And that truly does get to your question, and that is, what is the agenda or the problems on the agenda for the next governor? At the close of World War II, Minnesota as a whole, be it the business community, the academic community, the political community, really came together for the purpose of getting Minnesota recognized. We were a flyover state. And by that, I mean the planes went from New York to Chicago to LA. They didn't come to Minneapolis. And there was a real sense of togetherness. And by, I think it was August of 1973, Time magazine came out with a picture of our governor, Wendell Anderson, on the cover, and basically said, this is the state that works. At a time when our national government was in collapse as a result of Watergate, it was Minnesota, of all the 50 states, that stood out. And they wrote an excellent article. And the interesting part is that when the governor's picture appeared, both Democrats and Republicans cheered. It wasn't one applauding and one booing, or one getting on television and taking exceptions, etc. There was a clear understanding that this was a we victory. And to the credit of our government, led by Wendell Anderson, he was the one that brought together those partnerships. And those partnerships really worked. And then I look at today, and I see an enormous amount of dishonesty, self-interest, and a growing amount of incompetence. And we, frankly, are in trouble. And I think that so many of the members of the legislature, particularly, and in the administration, do everything they can to skate around the issues and prevent, if you will, an open and candid discussion. And I think much of this goes back to the Citizens United decision in 2010, when literally the floodgates of money opened up and the way of doing business with elected officials radically changed. And we haven't recovered from it. There's no way any sober person or anybody with an IQ that reaches room temperature can look at Washington and say, gee, isn't this a wonderful example of governance? Tragically, the same can't be said of St. Paul as well. And so I want to spend more time, if I may, putting together what I hope can be an agenda for tomorrow. Because right now, the average voter, and myself included, feel considerably distant from the government. I cannot tell you how many emails I have sent, but for every 30 emails that I send to a government official, I'm lucky if I get 2 responses. And I find that absolutely not just discouraging, but downright insulting. But the power of money has led incumbents to believe that having money and having the benefits, if you will, of unlimited advertising, et cetera, as we see now in the DFL Senate primary, that the role of the individual is no longer there. I remember very fondly that the Democrats got together on a very continuing basis and had their endless bean feeds. And for $5, your local officials came, and maybe once in a while, one of the state officials will come by, but you felt a sense of connection. You were a part of something. And on the Republican side, it was Bradis. I can't think of her first name right now. But Nancy, very good. Came up with the neighbor to neighbor. If everybody went around the community and they got to know who the Democrat was and the Republican, et cetera, blah, 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 you could go around and knock on the doors of the neighbors and say, look, can you give $5 to the good old party? And then I do remember this with literally great amusement. The Republicans had that fat cat dinner. And the wealth of Minnesota assembled for $100 a plate dinner.
Wow.
That was it. And I look back and you can understand that was the time when both parties felt a tremendous obligation to put up their best and their brightest. And I give great credit to John Coles and the Star Tribune for really setting a large part of the agenda for the University of Minnesota, for the role that it was playing in creating our affairs, and the Citizens League that brought the whole thing together. And Monday after Monday after Monday, you would come together in the Normandy Hotel. It was the CEO, not the number 3 man in the company, the number 1 man, and sitting down and developing policy. The whole idea of metropolitan governance came out of that. And I remember when I got into the legislature, there was a rush to get the bills that emanated from the Citizens League. Everybody wanted them. More often than not, Tom Berg was the luckiest. And it was just a time of building. And whenever somebody got out of line, they could get spanked by the Star Tribune. And the impact of that was absolutely enormous.
Hello?
I'm sorry, what? Okay. I'm losing the picture of you. I'm not, am I still connected?
You're connected.
Oh, there we go. You're back again. Okay. But in any event, I just have nothing but fond memories of the Anderson administration, tremendously talented. I've never seen so many young, bright, well-focused people in my life. Commissioner after commissioner understood exactly what the mission of their agency was. And by the way, it was all geared to the well-being of the individual citizen of Minnesota. So when you looked at the DNR, it was not about forestry and iron mining, et cetera. It was only about the person who canoed, camped, et cetera. And that's why the country as a whole looked at Minnesota and said, my gosh, there is a state that works. And it really and truly had its act together. And then I see the steady decline, basically starting with Citizens United. Money, political parties became weaker and more dependent upon their financing through their incumbents than through their grassroots organizations. Today, we sit in a society where 83% of Americans do not trust their government, and I'm one of them. 63% don't trust challengers because they're fearful the challengers are going to be just like the incumbents, and that's about feathering your own nest. But here in Minnesota, we had the warning signs, and frankly, we did not pay attention. The first big one came with the University of Minnesota Humphrey School report on the Minnesota State Legislature in May of 2021. And the bottom line of that report was that those people who came in and represented the moneyed interests, they got substantially favored treatment, including, and the word is, to shape legislation. Now, that's a quid pro quo, and that is a bribe. And yet it continues hour by hour. And there was literally no reaction to that report. I can't recall a single editorial. I can't recall any investigation by the legislature, any reaction from Democrats, Republicans. It was just silence. My colleagues and I have been working for the better part of 8 years, trying to alert the state of Minnesota about the upcoming water catastrophes that we're going to suffer and the consequences of allowing the moneyed interest to basically dictate Minnesota policy. And so let me start out very quickly, and if I can, let's talk about an agenda for tomorrow. Because when the new governor comes in, I truly hope that she will put together the kind of effort and bring together the kind of team that can lay out an agenda very much like the 100 Days of Franklin Roosevelt. And so let me, if I may, just quickly go through it. I would first of all bring in an overall financial team. And the one that I would like to head that is in your room right now, Jay Kiedrowski. But basically what I'm talking about is really understanding what the financial problems are, not just of state government, but of government in Minnesota in general. One of the things that we pay very little attention to is that roughly 30% of all Minnesota's revenue comes from the federal government. And the way we operate today is kind of like your own tough luck. So if I recall right, and Paul, you can feel free to correct me, I believe the Minneapolis school district is underwater.
Very much so.
I believe the city itself is underwater.
Very much so.
I believe St. Paul's having problems.
Absolutely.
Okay. And can anybody recall a sober discussion about how do we deal with the with our partner that contributes 30% of our well-being, and then analyzing the capacity of that partner to perform? Put politics aside. We have a national government that has about a $4 trillion debt. It's very likely going to have to raise interest rates. Today, 14% of its budget goes to pay just the interest on the borrowing alone. So they themselves are in a very precarious financial position. And secondly, when you look at their budget and ask yourself how much flexibility do they have, the answer basically comes down to about 12%. That's about the amount of discretionary spending that Congress can deal with. And that's one of the reasons we keep hearing individual members of Congress talking about, well, we got to reform Social Security, we got to reform the overall healthcare system, et cetera. And of course, that sends off waves of concern and fear, and that's very understandable. But as far as I know, there's no effort either on the federal or state level to understand fully one, what those problems are, and two, how do states deal with them? And do we want to participate in a discussion with the federal government relative to what they have? If I recall correctly, under President Obama, they put together the Simpson-Bowles Commission. And they came out with, I thought, a splendid report. And everybody had to take a haircut. But nevertheless, we were focused on what it is that we had to do to bring our system more in balance. And I'm very disappointed that we didn't get the kind of leadership that was necessary to bring that into fruition. And the result is we're in the pickle that we're in today. But in any event, I would certainly want to do a financial team. I would want that also to oversee LEAP. I don't know how many people in the room here tonight are familiar with the Loan Executive Program. It was launched by Wendell Anderson. It was one of the great successes. I just had unlimited respect for it and for the kind of talent the private sector loaned to the state to get the barnacles and to improve some of the systems of state government. And it worked very well, and it's something that we should always have at least every 5 years. But I'm also going to say some things that have to be done in order to restore trust to the public. I would first look at the Minnesota State Legislature, which has become nothing more than a balloon that keeps growing and growing and growing. They have now some 317 partisan staffers. Now, they assure us that those partisan staffers do not do partisan work. Wow. If anybody believes that, I've got a couple of bridges I'd like to sell you. But that really isn't the point. The point is, why does the legislature create an employment system that's unique to itself? We now sit here today with 4 political caucuses, a staff of a partisan staff. Now, I'm not including the rest of the 490 plus employees, but just the partisan staff of 315. They, in fact, have become enormous partisan armies. And what do armies like to do? They like to fight. And that's what we're getting. That's one of the reasons we have as much gridlock as we currently have. And I'd like to see us start with the abolition of partisan staffers. And then one by one, the caucuses and the legislature in open meetings can discuss whatever needs that they think they have that should be protected by partisan concerns. But let's start from the beginning. You can go right back home tonight and go onto your iPad and try to find out about these partisan staffers, and you'll be surprised what a maze you have to run through to get information. They do as much as they possibly can to protect their own personal interest. But the other part of the staffing concerns, and I'd like to have LEAP report on that, and I think, Paul, you can identify with that quite well, and that is that the more staff you have, the more the elected official is dependent upon staff, and the more you create that kind of relationship, the less the elected official knows about his job. And therein lies the problem. There's an appalling amount of ignorance in our political system, in part because elected officials have allowed themselves to become independent to the very staff that works for them.
Sure.
And I think LEAP should look into that. I don't want to see a program spun off that exempts the legislature. If it's a virtue for the Department of Commerce, it's a virtue for the state legislature. Okay, so the second thing I would want to do is particularly long-term planning. We discussed the impact of federal money. But what you're doing in this is you're trying to restore trust with the voters. The voters look and say, my gosh, they're going to affect this efficiency and this efficiency. That's what they want. The voter, they want in. It's really as simple as that. The second thing I would want to do is to create a commission on governance. And I want to start with very simple things. First of all, I want the legislature to have a dress code. I think it is stunning that you go to the legislative capitol, you see people that represent us in some of the highest positions that we have to offer, and they dressed like they were just baling hay. That's not acceptable, I'm sorry. But the other thing is, it introduces a certain amount of shabbiness in how they treat each other, and shabbiness in how they think and act. Discipline is a tremendous virtue. When Bud Grant took over the Minnesota Vikings, he saw nothing but a bunch of headhunters. The entire first practice was teaching players how to stand at attention in line at the playing of the national anthem. And if anybody's an old football fan, they knew full well the one thing Bud Grant had was discipline. Well, there's no reason why the legislature can't have a little discipline either. The second thing I would do is forbid all party caucuses to raise money. They are not in the money-raising business. We wrote a report and put it out in August of 2021 and noted that the 4 caucuses for the legislative races alone raised $26.5 million. That's about $130,000 per incumbent. This increases the awesome power of the caucus. And I'll get into other activities as well, but that's the one that opens the door.
Absolutely.
To making certain that representatives do not represent their district, they represent the caucus. And caucus is king. There was one episode where Jim Carlson challenged the caucus, and the result was they put up a candidate to run against him in the primary, and they beat him. He was fortunate and able to come back 2 years later. The other part of governance that I would do is term limits. 87% of Minnesotans want it. And yet the people we employ to serve us tell us no. The relationship that we currently have, and it's not just true in Minnesota, but everywhere else, is that we, the citizens, work for our elected officials. And just think of the powers that they have accorded themselves. Not just the normal powers, but they set their hours, they set their salaries, they create their pensions, they define their benefits. And they turn around and they tell us what the rules of engagement will be for a campaign. And then they draw the district lines. So we basically have incumbents selecting the voters rather than voters selecting the incumbents. And what an appalling disgrace it is as we go through these primary seasons and the general election, well, we'll be told that there are only 25 seats in Congress that are up for play.
Yeah.
I mean, and then we go over the world and say what a marvelous democracy we are. It's an absurdity. But the other part, we're building loyalty to the caucus, loyalty to the party, but who in the world is loyal to the public? And therein lies our problem. Okay, you seem to be anxious to go on. I'll stop there and you can open up the Q&A.
No, not at all. I mean, well, I'm only anxious to hear from our panel a bit, Governor. Okay. You've given us some great ideas and things to the loss of trust is something the Civic Caucus has been thinking a lot about, and you really put your finger on that in your opening comments and given us a lot to think about. Jay, the governor just gave you a new position as the head of the 100-day finance commission. First of all, are you going to take that role if offered? Beyond that, what are your questions? What is your question for?
Well, Amy's a friend, and she wouldn't do that to me. I've got a number of financial questions, Governor, that I can put to you. But the one that you started alluding to is the one that I'm most troubled by, and that's what can we do to bring back bipartisanship that is missing in politics today?
Well, I think the first thing is to clean out the problem. I'm just stunned at the amount of dishonesty, and I mean it's perfectly dishonest, and the amount of incompetence. I mean, I work very closely with 2 former DFL legislators, and we're all in the same boat. You can call up people. You're lucky if you get a return call. You will not get a return email. Access has been sharply reduced, but much more importantly, there is no concept of teamwork. And I can't sit here and say that I can wave a magic wand and we're going to suddenly have teamwork. One of the things I wanted to mention under governance is I want every legislator to go through an orientation. And that's a subject that's discussed in the orientation. We have to weaken the power of the caucus. You can't have caucus chieftains running around telling members, if you don't vote for this, we will not help you in your election. Or worse still, if you buck us on this, we will primary you. Let me ask you a question. Did you know that at least 2 years ago, and it may still be the case today, in the DFL Senate caucus, one member could prevent a bill from coming up to the floor?
That's crazy.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jay, do you have a follow-up from that?
No, that's fine.
Okay. Dave.
Yeah, well, first of all, Arne's opening point about what built Minnesota was always that we were a partnership of government, industry, unions, citizens, academia, and everything working together to the same objective. And oftentimes, if the Civic Caucus, or not Civic Caucus, Citizens League, or others came up with a plan, the debate wasn't about was that plan good, it was how to implement the plan. The Republicans would have an approach, the DFL would have another approach, and they'd debate it, not fight about it, not expand the thing. So we got to get back to this partnership. One of the unique experiences that I had in working with Bill Frenzel, and Arne, you would recognize it, and Jay, you may also, but there used to be a group of business and government folks, usually with some union folks, that enjoyed breakfast together. There would be, and I'd go with Bill mainly because he was living with me at the time, and I'd drive and then we'd go to breakfast and whatever, but there'd be 8 to 10 people there, and they'd just debate what should be done, and they came out with something that had to be done, and everybody had some action that should be done. We are not good these days at coming up with an action to something. We're great at talking. We're great at finding ways to create new programs and find new ways to spend money, but we're not good at finding ways to fix the economy so we have more jobs and more revenue. Now, Econ 01 says you can't just keep expanding your tax base without having a better business base. And I don't understand why there's no really concerted effort to find what's next in Minnesota. Yes, we have perhaps one of the best diverse economies in the nation, but what's next big wise, and what's even moderate size wise, that could help shape the future of Minnesota?
So Dave, forgive me, but I'd like to turn that into a question for the governor. And Governor, if you could, what could you say about? Dave makes some wonderful points about building the economy. I know you say you don't want to give advice, but what are your lessons, and how did we do that today? How does that happen today?
That was my third committee as part of the task force, and that is growing the economy. And it's an excellent.
Tell us about that.
I think we're blessed with the incredible amount of talent that we have. we sit here and the political system says unto itself, where is our talent? Well, the honest truth is they have very little. So the first thing they should do recognize is what they know and what they don't know. But you've got a tremendous access to the University of Minnesota. You've got access to the headquarters of the major companies in the country. You've got access to your labor, to your nonprofits, et cetera. There's a lot of very, very talented people that would be most willing to be called in and to pitch in and help out. But here we sit, and we're willing to talk tonight on problems like AI, climate change. But notice what's missing. I haven't heard anything from St. Paul on those subjects. It wasn't part of the last legislative session. It wasn't part of the State of the State speech. As a matter of fact, as far as I can see, government in state of Minnesota doesn't care about it. And therein lies the problem. So I want to see the planning function become a part of this particular task force so that we plan for tomorrow. And I want a real focus on the young people. We're losing them to a large degree. Let me just give you some polling numbers from Pew Research, who asked the question of high school seniors in 1937 at the height of the Depression and the collapse of our economy. Could you live in a country that was not a democracy? Some 94% said no. By 2017, that number dropped to 57. I mean, this is scary. And it's because of the tremendous distance that government has built between itself and the people they pretend to serve. And so I think it's a good idea to bring all these people back and let's re-identify our mission. I mean, that's why I want the orientation. I want elected officials to tell me in no uncertain terms, they represent us, the people, and nobody else. But David raised a good point. Why can't this go on? And why can't that go on? Well, what do you think is on the mind of elected officials? How to get reelected. And that means you buy into the partisan agenda of the caucus. In other words, you're in the war business. You're not in the serving the people business.
Absolutely. Dave, do you have a follow-up for the governor?
No, I think he responded appropriately to my comments, and that the need for the business development, and in my discussions with legislators, you hit it right, Arne. Talk to my legislators and others saying, why don't you worry about business development? They said, we're more concerned about our own backyard, whatever that means. And they don't care about overall state revenue and the economic development of the state. So it's they're out of focus, and your thoughts should help make that happen.
Well, I think we have to play much more of a public role, and I'd love to see the Civic Caucus play more of a public role. It's interesting. When you look at all the Pew Research polls on America, one big message comes out loud and clear. The public gets it. It's just the political system that doesn't.
Absolutely.
I mean, the gaps between the political system on virtually every single issue is enormous. And perhaps the worst one, and I can't give you the exact number, but it's something like 80% of Americans do not feel that their representative cares two hoots about what they think. I feel that way. I'm a former governor. I have written to constitutional officers. I can't get a response. Stonewalling is one of the most popular sports in St. Paul.
No question. The governor, I used to lament the fact that I couldn't get phone calls returned and emails. And when I learned that even the former governor, like yourself, can't get them responded, it put it all into it's absolutely and I appreciate your comment about the Civic Caucus, because we want to have those kind of conversations, even if we don't
participate. Because people are looking for hope.
Absolutely.
Gosh, it means so much to people. I mean, I was born in the Depression. I saw World War II, and I mean, our family was poor, but what was so gratifying was the togetherness of America.
Yeah.
And how all of us shared. I remember in our building, a woman jumped off the roof, and within minutes, everybody found out she had just gotten the telegram. And you know,
Hmm.
that brings the war home to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now there's such distance. Everybody's in a silo. What happened to those breakfasts that we used to have? Wouldn't it be nice to see the governor of the state of Minnesota sitting down with the president of 3M and various other companies, some labor leaders? Wouldn't it be nice to have a Dave Rowe tell a joke? I don't see any togetherness whatsoever. And if you want bipartisanship, it's not going to happen until we have relationships.
Absolutely.
And legislators don't have them with each other anymore. They don't even, matter of fact, I'd love to find out if they even like their jobs anymore.
A lot of them don't. I can tell you that because
they'll be there for life because of other things. Okay, I'm sorry.
Well, on a hopeful note, we have one of our future leaders with us.
Okay, future leaders, speak up.
Arya, you've heard we need hope, and we see it in people like you. So, what's your question for the governor?
Yeah, thank you so much. I thought it was really interesting, a lot of things that you were saying between how the distance between the government and the people have widened. What would you say is the main cause of that, and how would you suggest bringing it back together?
I think it's essential for the leadership of the state to come together. And when I say leadership, I'm not just talking about political leadership. I'm talking about the totality of it, the corporate heads, the University of Minnesota, the state university system, labor, etc. Come together and start discussing the concerns that you and I have. Most of us that are of the older generation, we were brought up at a time when CEOs, I think universally, were born and raised in Minnesota. And so there was a homegrown loyalty, if you will. And we kind of took that for granted. Now, I don't know what the status is today, but I'm not so sure you can name a CEO that's a homegrown Minnesotan. And the company which I served with, our CEO packed his bags on Thursday night and flew out of here. And so basically was here just so there's no real investment, if you will, in the future of Minnesota. And the attitude is if we can't get the talent in Minnesota, it's no problem. We can skim it and get it somewhere else. And if we can't get into America, we'll skim further and get it globally. I think we got to build a relationship between K through 12 and higher ed. Right now, we have a system where 1/3 of our K through 12 students are inadequately prepared for college. That's stunning. I mean, what company could survive when 1/3 of its products are defective? But we don't insist on excellence. We just lower the standards. Let me ask you this. What school do you go to?
Eden Prairie High School.
Okay. Now, have you ever spent a day, let's just say for the sake of discussion, in North High?
No, I haven't.
I'd like to see that happen. I think it's essential that people like you create exchanges and try to figure out why is it. Let me just ask you another question. If you were to assess Eden High, and I don't want to get you into trouble, on a 1 to 10 scale, what would you put it?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, if you were to rate your experience at Eden High between, say, 1 and 10, what would you give it?
Like a 7 to like an 8.
Okay. And may I ask what college you're going to go to?
I haven't decided on a college, but probably like the U of M.
Okay, that's very good to hear, frankly. Yeah, I would love it. I think it'd be wonderful. There was a good op-ed in today's paper from the president of St. Benedict's talking about we don't listen to the young people, but we prescribe all sorts of solutions. I would love students to get exchanged. I don't want to get carried away here right now, but I grew up in the Bronx of New York. And in our school, the prime goal is to prevent juvenile delinquency. Education was kind of the last thing. When I came into the school that I went to, it was a private school in Connecticut on a scholarship. I set the all-time record for the lowest test scores in the history of the school. Flat zeros across the board. Today, it's no longer possible because it's all about technology. And what I'm saying is we're throwing more and more children into the ash heap. And we in Minnesota thought it could never happen here, but you know what? It is happening.
Yeah. Arya, do you have a follow-up for the governor?
This is kind of like a different question, but Governor Carlson, you governed like during a time when there was an absence of social media and like the super high corporate spend or campaign spending that we see today. How do you think the absence of these elements shaped the way you governed, and what advice would you give to today's leaders trying to govern in this environment?
Well, no, I think that's an excellent question. I honestly and truly wish I had an answer. As far as I'm concerned, it's a catastrophe. It's a clear case where science outpaces man's ability to govern it. And we've been warned about that. I went to Williams College, and our president got a Pulitzer Prize for a book he wrote way back in about, I think, at the close of the war. And it basically raised the same question: man against science. Can man use science, or will science use man? And here we are with artificial intelligence. It's not even recognized as a potential problem by our state government. We're not planning for it. No, I think, the more you talk, the more excited I am about the potential of bringing some young people together, and I'd be very happy to meet with them. I mean that most sincerely. And let's say if we have to learn. I would love to advocate, but I can't advocate for young people and I know so little about their challenges.
That's a fantastic offer, Arya. Maybe you can bring that back to some of your colleagues, and we'll get folks.
That'd be
Governor,
awesome.
there's a youth Congress now. There's the Congress and speech teams from throughout the state. I think that'd be a wonderful thing to connect you with some of our young folks. Governor, I want to jump in with a question, and that is, it seems to me that there's a horrifying lack of transparency and accountability at all levels of government. That almost all significant decisions are made behind closed doors. There's very little real debate in public on the issues that are most important to us. Everything from the single, 1,000-page omnibus bills that are done in private. You talk about all the money that in the agreements made behind closed doors, and then there's no accountability for wrongdoing. Is it that much worse today than it was when you were there? Did you have the kind of accountability and transparency when you were governor?
I certainly hope so. I can honestly say very, very rarely did the subject ever come up. I think there was an understanding that any decision you make is going to be open. I remember one of the rules we had in our administration to all commissioners. There were basically several rules. One is anybody caught cheating on their expense account was fired. 2, no commissioner was permitted to raise money for political parties or any kind of political operation. And the third one was any decision you make or anything you engage in, pretend you're reading it on page 1 of the Star Tribune. I think there was an acceptance that transparency is part of our life. Was it inconvenient at times? Yes. I wrote a letter today to the Attorney General about his water task force. That's one of the things I said there, because now we have all these data centers coming up with private contracts. So basically, all the risk will be assumed by the public, but the public is not entitled to in any way, shape, or form participate in the decisions. The other thing that I'm stunned about, and I'd like to see the court speak to it, if I read the Constitution correctly, omnibus bills are illegal.
Absolutely.
I always thought it was one subject per bill. why don't we insist on enforcing that? I mean, I'd like to see you invite in the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and raise that question. Why don't you crack down on this? And by the way, speaking of the courts, I'd like to see a second thing, because now the Walz administration, for the second time, has been engaged in cover-ups. And the Supreme Court was involved in the first one. If the Supreme Court had followed up on its order, I'm not so persuaded that the second one would have occurred. So it's one thing to deliver an order, but I think they should also have a report back scheme.
So, Governor, real quickly on the single subject, the Civic Caucus actually was an amicus in a lawsuit several years ago challenging the omnibus bill. So we have been active in that, and it's outrageous what's happened with that.
Well, it is, because it's a way of, first of all, it compromises the quality of public policy. I think we all are close enough to politics to know how bills are drafted. So you could put together a bill that has 10 subjects, 2 are completely offensive, but you surround it with a few goodies and you pass them out. And then the person comes back to the public and says, well, I had to do it because look at all the goodies that were in it. No, that's not acceptable. But we can hold people accountable. There's nothing to prevent us from holding people accountable. And by the way, one of the best ways to do it is publicly. Public letters to the editor, public commentaries, you bet. And stay away from the partisanship, because they're both in it. One is infinitely worse than the other, I'll grant you that, but they're both in it.
Absolutely. Well, I want to open up to some additional questions.
Yeah,
Jay, Dave, Arya, anyone have an additional question they want to ask the Governor?
do, Paul. Thank you. Governor, you were known as a fiscal conservative.
Mm-hmm.
You inherited a large shortfall when you took over in 91, and you were able to get the credit rating back up to AAA. Talk about fiscal management.
Frankly, it was a fun exercise. I mean that most sincerely. Because when you work with John Gunyu and Peter Gillette, you've got a couple of hawks. And I remember I literally went through everything line by line, and there were debates over these things, no question about it. But I remember one time I vetoed the money for the film board. Gosh, in a very brief time, Peter Gillette came barging in. And he started to explain to me all the economic benefits that we get from the film industry. Boy, did he make me an advocate of the film industry. That's the way it ought to be. But you've got to have competent people. And competent people want to work in an environment where they feel that they can be fully participatory, but also fully honest. There's nothing wrong with sitting in a meeting and somebody says, Governor, I think your idea is absolutely dreadful. That's fine. I mean, here we sit with the president who just made a perfect ass out of himself once again about vaccine. And nobody sits around and says, Mr. President, with all due respect, we have doctors here that we can rely on, and you have no background whatsoever. I mean, good management encourages participation. And I'll tell you what was very good about the exercise in the budget deficit was that it forced knowledge of the totality of the operations and what each board, et cetera, did. And by the way, you run across a lot of organizations that should have died 30 years ago. I remember we cut funding for some organization that taught fathers how to be fathers. Unbelievable. But, it was probably a pretty good idea, some years back, but it certainly wasn't appropriate anymore. But it did that. The other thing is it spins off a lot of good ideas on what we can do to attract business, what we can do to solve certain problems in a slightly different way. And out of that, for instance, came the whole children's cabinet, trying to amalgamate all the concerns of children under one big, broad umbrella. It encourages innovation. And creative people, intelligent people, and capable people like to do that. The one thing we can say is this: Nobody has accused Minnesota state government of being creative. We've lost that.
Not recently, anyway.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Jay, do you have a follow-up?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. How about you, Dave? Do you have an additional question for the governor?
Well, one of the things that I think was certainly present during your time, Arnie, but and previously, but today it's not there, and that is the common objectives between outstate and metro Minnesota. We're very much at least outstate versus a metro, and maybe metro versus 3 or 4 portions outstate. And until we can get back to some sort of unity, we aren't going to solve a lot of these problems.
I agree.
What were you doing that made that happen?
I think the experience I loved dearly was serving as state auditor and traveling the state, and then on a regional basis, meeting with them over the audit function itself. And you really build a partnership. But more than building a partnership, I built tremendous respect for local government. That's the strength of our system, is in the local government. And I didn't feel any partisanship whatsoever. I'm not saying there wasn't there, but I never ran across it. But there was a focus on good public service. I would like to see the legislature and the governor do pretty much what the Supreme Court does. I'm assuming they still do it, and then go out and hold meetings outstate. If Amy Klobuchar were to be the next governor, and I believe she will be, I would assign Benjamin Scheer, who's a well-respected local government official, to be in charge of a committee of building relationships between the outstate and the in-state. And because there are a lot of communities that are financially hurting. And we have hospital closures that have not fully impacted yet, but that's going to have very serious outcomes that we do not want to live with. And I think the more you give people an opportunity to have input, the more they all become one. But you're right. I think the in-state, outstate is just another example of isolation. I feel isolated. And I'm in the metro area now.
Absolutely. Connections. So much of it's about connections.
Yeah, it's just, all of us can tell fun stories. And those fun stories are all about relationships. And partisanship has gotten to the point where it's obsessive. How can you be thinking about good policy when your caucus is always focused on a partisan war? Mm-hmm. I'll give you one example. The former president of Oklahoma University wrote a book. He had served in the United States Senate for a while. Somebody in your audience will recognize his name. It can't come to me right now. But he told of being a Democrat freshman in the United States Senate. And they were voting on a bill one day, and he gets a tap on his shoulder, and it's Howard Baker, the majority leader of the Republican Party. And he said, look on page 92, paragraph 3. And, oh, my God, that's good for Oklahoma. And he changes his vote from no to yes. So here was the leader of the opposite party telling a freshman, don't make a bad vote. Now, in today's environment, there would be no tap on the shoulder. But within 3 days of the ads all over Oklahoma, tearing that poor guy apart. I'll tell you one final story, because I think it's indicative. And this is a story that Hubert Humphrey told of himself. One of his bills, is the resurrection of the Civilian Conservation Corps. He had decided to resurrect it. And it was called to the floor, and frankly, he was unprepared. He didn't know if he had the votes or not. And so he ran out into the retiring room to twist arms, and they sat next to him. One of you guys might remember him. The chairman of the Farm Relations Committee from Wisconsin, a fairly elderly guy. Way back in, what?
LaFollette?
Who?
LaFollette?
Oh, no. After LaFollette.
Okay.
Yeah. But in any event, that was the first person that Humphrey hooked. Now, this is Humphrey telling his story. And he says, I told him, I said, it's a good bill. Just think of all those kids in Milwaukee and getting out of that hot summer up there and coming up and shoveling dirt up here and blah, blah, blah. And that actually didn't work, and he come up with another one. Yeah, but think about the educational experience they'll get. They'll all mix together, and we'll become more of a polyglot society and build all of that. Then he came up with a third argument. Finally, he turned. He said, "You got to remember, I've been the third senator from Wisconsin all this time. In effect, you guys owe me a vote." And the guy said absolutely nothing. And he gets up and he walks down the aisle. And he walks down the aisle very much like it happened with the senator from Arizona. And his name was called. He votes aye, and bingo, Republican votes flipped and voted the bill in. You'll never hear that story in today's environment. And unfortunately, the political system has bought into the hatreds of Donald Trump. I mean, it's dreadful. How can you go to work with and socialize with people you don't even like? Or you're in the business of making enemies.
Yeah.
No, that's not the founding fathers. They envisaged a collegial system, competitive, but competitive on the basis of ideas and what better impact, what policies will better impact the public. We've gotten so far away from that.
A good example of that was John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. They were strong political opponents.
Right.
One became president, the other became president. But guess what? In their later years after having been president, they corresponded regularly.
Yeah.
And then they both died on the same day.
I knew you were going to bring it up. I knew you would. And it was July 4th.
Yep. July 4th. Great patriots, both of them.
Yeah, and it's so nice you read about the Bill Clinton, George Bush one.
Absolutely.
Let me tell you a story. I didn't know how that started. What actually happened was when Bill Clinton came into his office and he pulled out one of the drawers, there was a note from George Bush. And it was very warm, very inviting, and that just melted Clinton. That's the way it ought to be.
Absolutely. Arya, do you have one last question for the governor?
Yeah. When do you think that the government started to serve themselves rather than the people, and what would you say are the main causes of that?
Yeah, I don't think that this is one of those areas where you're never going to find a black-white.
Yeah.
What you're going to find are tendencies here and there. Do we have people hanging on to incumbency in my day? You bet your life they did. Did we do things that gave us an advantage in an election? Yeah, we certainly did. I think the one that opened the floodgates was Citizens United. That was a dramatic change in American politics when this enormous spigot of money flowed in. And then all the ways you can hide it and disguise it. The truth is, we don't know where our candidates get their money from. We don't have the slightest idea. You can say the person says, I just got $2,500 for the Americans for a better and safer environment. Oh, that's wonderful. Actually, it's an industry group that wants to mine in northern Minnesota. And they're protected. And I'm glad you raised that up because I wanted to get into public funding. When Citizens United came out, some states, New Jersey, Colorado, both passed laws that said all contributions have to be traced to the source of origin. That's wonderful because that really hurts dark money. But I think it was the state of Connecticut that if I were to advise Minnesota, I would adopt it. And that is a very strong public funding program. And I'm talking about for a candidate for governor getting several $1 million. You cannot have a government that is divided, where part of it says I represent the moneyed interest and the other part says I will represent the public. When you go home tonight, write these names down and Google them and see what you think. In the state of Minnesota, we're allowing our water to be controlled to a large extent by a corporation known as Glencore. Glencore. Look up their splendid record. Then, God, I'm losing I got to have all these senior moments. Let me try to think of this. I would look up the Connecticut plan and begin to understand that and say to yourself, that really has a tremendous impact. And then I would Google all the studies of Congress and the issue of money. There are a lot of an endless array of academic studies on how Congress represents special. It's well known in both caucuses that certain bills won't pass because of this, or if you want votes, you can't go to him because he represents that industry. But if you go to her, she's opposed to that industry and she'll help you out. I mean, it's absurd.
Governor, let me just interrupt you if I could. One of the problems with the Congress that just irritates me so much is that the budget process is completely broken down.
There is no budget.
The appropriations committees don't get together anymore to work out what they want the budget to be. There are no conference committees between the House and the Senate. It now is one big bill that the majority leader and the speaker negotiate, and that becomes the law in our budget.
Right. It's criminal. Totally. And that's why it's so important. And I'm going to be very blunt with you. The Democratic Party has to realize they have the obligation to reform and rebuild. And in doing that, they can no longer allow the members to engage in the compromises that they've been involved in. We're either going to be an example of how things ought to be done, and we can't permit this kind of tawdry behavior. And I think it's something that never was publicly dealt with the way it should have been. But when I came in 1970, we had a lobbyist sit with the Speaker of the House in chairing our caucuses. And it was well known that if you did this, or that might displease the industries that paid the way, blah, blah, blah. And legislators at that time, particularly attorneys, were very open about who they represented. So it wasn't uncommon for somebody to get up on the floor. This bill comes from the hotel industry, whom I represent, blah, blah, blah. And then Ernie Lindstrom took him on and really cleaned house. And boy, did that work. And then the Democrats came in 71, but in 73, they took over. And they cleaned house. And I mean, I think of a guy like Ray Farrisee. If Ray ever saw anything that he thought was offensive, my God, he was on the floor speaking within a matter of minutes. The outrage was there. Today, you get punished by the caucus. And that's why they're secretive. And that's why, frankly, they're fundamentally flawed. They're blatantly dishonest.
So I want to give you one more chance after we've all spoken, Governor, to make some final remarks.
Well, I
want to now turn, if I could, to what each of us have learned from what you've said tonight, and then have you give some final remarks about that. And I'm going to start, and I'm going to turn it then over to Jay and Dave and Arya. What I've learned, but perhaps already believed, but you've been a passionate supporter of it tonight, is we need nothing short of a political transformation in this state. And nothing short of that, anything short of that will be an unsuccessful governorship. That it's a very tall order, but I'm going to start by saying that's what I took from your comments tonight. Dave, what is the number one thing you took from what the governor told us tonight?
Pretty much the same thing. I think the structure of the legislature has changed significantly. One point that you brought up when you brought up Ernie Lindstrom, Arne, is there was used to be a more significant mix of successful business people as part of it. Now it's professional legislators.
Yeah.
That in itself, I'm not going to knock those young people that are interested in government in that aspect, but we need a better mix, and we need to find a way to make that happen. Get back to that. That would do a lot to strengthen it, and it's not there. If you go back to the 60s, 70s, and part of the 80s, there was a good mix, and I think that had some impact. And but your points need to be considered. We need long-range planning. We need to develop new businesses, and the big word of trust. And the other one is we need to listen to everybody, not just talk to everybody. We need to see what other people have to say, absorb that, and then react to it. But don't kick them in the butt, and don't listen to them. So start listening, and then planning the approach after that. But no, your comments, Arnie, are you need to write a book about it, and we'll all start making it happen. So that's about it.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you for being with us tonight. Really appreciate it. Jay.
First of all, Governor, let me thank you for being part of this. You once again demonstrate what a great public servant you were for the state of Minnesota. The thing that I took away most from what you said in thinking about it is Citizens versus United. That really changed so much in our body politic that I wish there was a way for us to get a new Supreme Court and a new interpretation and an elimination of the outside money.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jay, and it's great to have you be a part of this discussion. Arya.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Governor, for this interview. I think similar to what Paul said, what I learned was how important it is to have a big overhaul of the structure of the government to get the government back to working for the people and earning their trust.
Boy, very well put, Arya. Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to have you with us. Governor, I want to turn it over to you with our great thanks for your stewardship of this state, for your voice, and in particular, for your joining us tonight to give you the chance to make some final comments.
Well, thank you. No, it's been a very enjoyable exchange, and I very much appreciate it. I think we all feel the same way. And that is that we had something that was incredibly valuable, worked remarkably well, and then somewhere along the line, we got fat, dumb, and happy. And we allowed, inch by inch, corruption to enter, self-interest to enter, conflicts of interest to enter, and ultimately, we do more what the moneyed interests do, even when it jeopardizes the lives and the well-being of the public we pretend to serve. We didn't get a chance to talk tonight about the water issue, but that was the first one that got me interested in this. And I'm just stunned, absolutely stunned, that sober public elected officials will put some of the world's worst actors in charge of our future. And I urge every one of you to go back and look up Glencore and then ask the question. There hasn't been one public meeting, not one, allowed in the Minnesota State Legislature on reforming our mining laws or any legislation that any environmental group introduced relative to protecting our water. None. And the result is the world is now in crisis, and that crisis is getting rapidly worse and worse. And we, over the next 7-8 years, are going to be dealing with sulfide mining in northern Minnesota. And right now, about 40 million people are at risk. And yet it hasn't gotten one single hearing from Republicans or Democrats. And the administration has done absolutely nothing to be of assistance. So we do need a radical change.
Thank you, Governor. And yeah, there's no worse example of how far we've fallen than that issue. No question about it.
It's dreadful, dreadful. Well, this is wonderful. We'll see what happens tonight, and I hope it's some good news.
Well, I think we're all hopeful, or we wouldn't be having this conversation.
I think you're right. I think you're right. Well, this has been marvelous. I've enjoyed it, and I thank you.